You are looking at a ham that has been hanging in this barn for 18 months. No refrigeration, no freezer, no electricity of any kind. The meat is safe to eat. I am going to slice a piece off in front of you. The interior is deep red, the texture is firm, the smell is clean and slightly sweet. This ham will remain safe to eat for another year or longer if stored properly. And the total cost to preserve this 15-pound piece of meat was $5 in salt and curing agents. I am standing in a smokehouse in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. The walls are lined with hams, bacon slabs, and cured sausages. Some of this meat has been here for over a year. None of it requires power. None of it will spoil. And the Amish family that cured it has never once worried about a freezer failing or a power outage destroying hundreds of dollars of protein. What you are about to learn is the exact salt curing method that has preserved meat safely for over 2,000 years across every climate and culture that needed protein to last through winter, war, or famine. This is not about jerky or dehydration. This is about whole cuts of meat stored at room temperature for years without decay. The chemistry is precise, the method is specific, and the food safety regulations that now discourage home curing have less to do with danger and more to do with an industry that profits from your dependence on refrigeration. But before we go any further, I need to say this clearly. Improperly cured meat can kill you. Botulism is real. It is deadly. And if you do not follow the exact ratios and procedures I am about to explain, you are creating a biological hazard. This is not a forgiving process. There is no room for guesswork. You either do it correctly or you do not do it at all. If that sounds harsh, good. Because the moment you treat this casually is the moment you put yourself and your family at risk. Now that we have that established, let me explain why this method works and why it has been systematically removed from public knowledge, even though it is one of the safest and most reliable food preservation techniques ever developed. Meat spoils because bacteria consume it. Bacteria need three things to survive: moisture, warmth, and time. If you remove any one of those three elements, bacterial growth stops. Refrigeration removes warmth. Freezing removes both warmth and available moisture by turning water into ice, but both methods require continuous electricity. The moment the power fails, the clock starts. You have hours, maybe a day, before the meat begins to spoil. Salt curing removes moisture permanently. Salt is hygroscopic. It pulls water out of organic tissue through osmotic pressure. When you pack meat in salt, the salt draws water from the muscle fibers into the surrounding environment. As the moisture leaves the meat, the water activity inside the tissue drops below the threshold bacteria need to reproduce. They do not die immediately. They simply cannot function. And without moisture, they cannot produce the toxins that cause food poisoning. But salt alone is not enough. There is one specific bacteria that can survive in low moisture, low oxygen environments: Clostridium botulinum. This is the organism that produces botulinum toxin, the most lethal biological substance known to science. A single gram of botulinum toxin could kill 1 million people. It is not something you take lightly. Clostridium botulinum thrives in anaerobic conditions: sealed jars, vacuum-packed meat, and the dense interior of a thick cut of ham where oxygen cannot penetrate. Salt will not stop it, but sodium nitrite will. Sodium nitrite, when added to curing salt, converts to nitric oxide inside the meat. Nitric oxide prevents Clostridium botulinum from producing toxin. It does not kill the bacteria. It disables the mechanism they use to create the poison. This is why every safely cured meat in the world, from prosciutto to bacon to salami, contains nitrite. It is not optional. It is not a preference. It is the difference between safe cured meat and a jar of botulism waiting to happen. The curing agent that contains sodium nitrite is called Prague powder #1 or Cure #1. It is a mixture of 6.25% sodium nitrite and 93.75% salt, dyed pink so you do not confuse it with table salt. You can buy it online or at any butcher supply store for about $8 per pound. 1 pound will cure over 100 pounds of meat. The USDA-approved ratio for dry curing is 1 level teaspoon of Cure #1 per 5 pounds of meat, mixed with half a cup of kosher salt. That ratio is not negotiable. Too little nitrite and you risk botulism. Too much nitrite and the meat becomes toxic in a different way. You measure it precisely. You follow the ratio exactly. There is no such thing as eyeballing this process. Now let me walk you through the actual curing procedure because the steps matter as much as the ingredients. Start with a fresh cut of meat. Pork is traditional because pork fat carries flavor well, and the texture of cured pork is exceptional. A bone-in ham, a pork belly for bacon, or a shoulder for country-style curing. The meat should be cold but not frozen, between 36 and 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Mix your curing salt. For every 5 pounds of meat, combine 1 level teaspoon of cure #1 with half a cup of kosher salt. If you want to add flavor, you can include black pepper, brown sugar, garlic powder, or other spices. But the salt and cure #1 are the only components that matter for preservation. Rub the curing mixture into every surface of the meat. Do not leave any area uncovered. The cure needs to contact the entire exterior. Pack the mixture into any crevices or folds. Place the meat in a non-reactive container, glass, plastic, or stainless steel, not aluminum. Cover the container and place it in a refrigerator or a cold space that stays between 36 and 40 degrees. This is critical. The meat must stay cold during the curing process. If the temperature rises above 40 degrees, bacteria can grow faster than the salt can inhibit them. The general rule is 7 days of curing time per inch of thickness. A 2-inch thick pork belly needs 14 days. A 4-inch thick ham needs 28 days. During this time, liquid will pool at the bottom of the container. That is the moisture being pulled out of the meat. Drain it every few days. After the curing period is complete, remove the meat and rinse it thoroughly under cold water. You are washing off the excess salt on the surface. Pat the meat dry with a clean towel. At this point, the meat is cured. It is safe to eat, but it is very salty. If you want to reduce the salt content, you can soak the meat in cold water for 12 to 24 hours, changing the water every few hours. This is called desalinating. It pulls some of the salt back out. After rinsing or desalinating, the meat needs to dry. Hang it in a cool, dry location with good air circulation. The ideal environment is 55 to 65 degrees Fahrenheit with 50 to 60% humidity. Too warm and the fat can go rancid. Too humid and mold can grow excessively. Some mold is normal. A thin white film on the surface is harmless and can be wiped off with a cloth soaked in vinegar. Black, green, or fuzzy mold is a problem. If you see that, the meat needs to be discarded. The drying and aging process can take anywhere from a few weeks to several months depending on the size of the cut and your desired flavor. During this time, the remaining moisture continues to evaporate. The texture becomes firmer, the flavor concentrates and develops complexity. A properly aged country ham can hang for a year or longer. The longer it hangs, the more intense the flavor becomes. When you are ready to eat the meat, slice off what you need and cook it. Cured meat is very salty, so it is typically served in thin slices or used as a flavoring agent in soups, beans, or cooked greens. You do not eat it like a fresh steak. You use it the way Italians use prosciutto or the way Southerners use country ham, as an ingredient that adds depth and salt to a dish. Now let me tell you why this process, which has been documented and practiced safely for over 2,000 years, has been systematically discouraged by modern food safety agencies. In 1967, the USDA published guidelines for home meat curing. The guidelines were detailed, specific, and widely distributed through agricultural extension offices. Farmers and rural families across the country used those guidelines to cure meat safely at home. By the 1980s, those guidelines were no longer promoted. Extension offices stopped distributing them. The USDA shifted its messaging toward commercial processing. Home curing was not banned. It was simply removed from official recommendations. When people called extension offices to ask about curing meat, they were told to consult a professional processor or to freeze the meat instead. The reason given was liability. If the USDA published home curing guidelines and someone got sick, the agency could be held responsible. That explanation is not entirely wrong, but it is also not the full story. The commercial meat processing industry in the United States generates over 250 billion stuffed per year. That industry depends on centralized processing, refrigerated transportation, and consumer dependence on grocery stores and freezers. If home curing became widespread again, a significant portion of that infrastructure would become unnecessary. Families who can preserve their own meat do not need to buy processed bacon, ham, or sausage. They do not need large freezers running 24 hours a day. They do not need to worry about power outages destroying their food supply. And they do not need to participate in a supply chain that can be disrupted by weather, fuel costs, or distribution problems. The USDA did not suppress home curing through legislation. They suppressed it through silence, by simply not teaching it, by not publishing the guides, by not answering the questions. And within one generation, the knowledge stopped being passed down. But the Amish never stopped, because they never depended on the grid. They never adopted refrigeration as a primary preservation method. And they never needed the USDA to tell them what their grandparents had already taught them. An Amish family butchers a hog in November when the weather turns cold. The meat is processed the same day. Hams and shoulders are packed in curing salt and placed in a cool cellar. Bacon slabs are rubbed with cure and hung to dry. Sausages are stuffed, smoked, and aged. By December, the meat is cured. By January, it is aging. By spring, it is ready to eat, and it will last through the following winter without a single kilowatt of electricity. The cost to cure a 200-pound hog is approximately $15 in salt and curing agents. That same hog, processed commercially and stored in a freezer, would cost $500 to butcher and $100 to $115 per year in electricity to keep frozen. Over 5 years, the cost difference is $1,000. And that does not account for the risk of freezer failure, which can destroy the entire supply in a single power outage. Compare that to cured meat hanging in a smokehouse. No electricity, no failure point, no dependency. Now I need to address one final safety point, because this is where most people make mistakes. You cannot cure meat in summer. You cannot cure meat in a warm garage. You cannot cure meat in any environment that exceeds 40 degrees during the curing phase or 65 degrees during the aging phase. Temperature control is not optional. If you do not have a space that stays consistently cold, you cannot safely cure meat, period. This is not a technique for someone living in an apartment with no temperature-controlled storage. This is for people with cellars, unheated sheds, or climate-controlled environments that can maintain the necessary ranges. If you cannot provide those conditions, do not attempt this. Freeze your meat or buy it fresh, but do not try to cure it in unsafe conditions and hope for the best. That is how people get sick, and that is why the USDA stopped recommending it, not because the method does not work, but because people were doing it wrong. If you do it right, it is one of the safest preservation methods ever developed. If you do it wrong, it is one of the most dangerous. There is no middle ground. You now have the exact method. Salt and cure #1 at USDA ratios. Cold curing at 36 to 40 degrees for 7 days per inch of thickness. Rinse, dry, and age at 55 to 65 degrees with good air circulation. Monitor for mold. Discard anything that smells wrong, looks wrong, or feels wrong. That is the complete system. It is not simple, but it is specific. And if you follow it exactly, you can preserve meat for years without refrigeration. If you could eliminate your dependence on a freezer and preserve a year's worth of protein for $5, what would that change about how you think about food security? Leave that in the comments.